All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are a little bit delayed for about 10 minutes or so, and we are expecting more people to come in. In fact, we had about 60 people registered for this program, and so far we have only a few just come in. We are expecting more. My name is Ginpao Kipgen. I'm the Executive Director for Center for Southeast Asian Studies, and I would like to welcome everyone. And before we go on to proceed the program as it is written here, I would like to invite my research assistant, Sanjana Dahar, to say formally a welcome words, and then we'll proceed to the next program.
A very good afternoon, everyone. I, on behalf of the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, would like to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished guests, faculty members, participants, and audience. The theme for today's discussion is Contested Identity and Competing Claims along India-Myanmar border region. We have here with us a panel of seasoned experts, and it is my pleasure to introduce them. Our first speaker, Dr. Bhagat Oinam, is Professor of Philosophy, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is also a chairperson of the newly established Center for the Study of Northeast India at the university. He had earlier worked at CSDS, NEHU, and IIT Bombay. His areas of interest include existentialism in phenomenology, moral and social philosophy, and indigenous philosophy. Our second speaker, Dr. M. Amarjeet Singh, is professor at the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research, Jamia Millia Islamia University. He teaches courses on social conflict and society and politics of India's Northeast. His research interest focuses on conflict studies, identity politics, and migration studies. Our third speaker, Dr. Thongkolal Haokep, is an assistant professor at the Center for the Study of Law and Governance, Jawaharlal Nehru University. His areas of interest include governance, ethnicity and ethnic relations, borderland studies, India's Look-East policy, and Northeast India studies. He has previously taught at the Department of Political Science, Presidency University. And lastly, our fourth speaker, Mr. K. Kokho, is an assistant professor at the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research, Jamia Millia Islamia University. He teaches political sociology, and his areas of interest include ethnicity, identity, and conflict. The panel discussion will be chaired by Dr. Negenpao Kipgen, Executive Director of Center for Southeast Asian Studies. He is also an Associate Professor at the Jindal School of International Affairs. I would like to especially thank our guests for sparing their valuable time despite the busy schedule to be a part of this event and make it a grand success. I would also like to express my gratitude to the Center for giving me this opportunity to address the House. I would now like to open the floor to the chair for the commencement of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjana. So before we proceed on to the next program, I would like to invite Vansika to bring some of the gifts that we have for our speakers today. And I would like to invite first Professor Oinam to stand up and receive a token of gift from our center. Then and next, Dr. Amarjeet Singh. And next, Dr. Thongkolal Haokep. And last but not the least, Mr. Kokho. All right, thank you very much. So we are expecting a number of guests coming on the way, including one Indian former ambassador to Myanmar, the Gautam Mukhopadhyay is on his way. And I would like to acknowledge friends here, especially our friend A.K. Misra, Dr. A.K. Misra. He was the former Vice Chancellor of ICFA University in Mizoram. Thanks for coming. He has been a strong and active supporter of our center's activities. He was there last semester when we organized a conference, similar discussion, and we hope to extend that cooperation and relationship in the years to come as well. And thank you very much. And also I'd like to say thank you to my friends and my students as well for attending this panel discussion. And I know there are several programs going on today, but this shows that you are either interested in the area or you would like to see the speakers face to face, because we are anyway streaming live the entire event. As we speak, we stream live, and you can watch these things at the end of the program at your home. So before I begin to invite the speakers, I would like to make some clarifications. So the topic itself, if you look at contested identity and competing claims along India-Myanmar border region, by itself is already complicated. And I have studied a lot about this Indo-Myanmar region. And today, the main reason why I bring these scholars together is to have a conversation, academic conversation. Because I know that in its community, this issue has been talked about, discussed at length at different levels. And as far as my knowledge is concerned, we have never had any academic platform where we bring together scholars from this community talking about their own issues. But I also like to warn you that we are not trying to ask the speakers to represent their own community. By no means, nobody is representing the entire community. We just would like to hear from them as scholars. What do they say based on the topic that they have been assigned? And also, I would like to ask the students or the audience to be very careful when you ask questions. So this topic has been very complicated, very sensitive, and very controversial at times. But since it's academic conversation, I hope we all understand, and then we all have a very mature discussion. So having said that, I would first like to invite our first speaker, Dr. Bhagat Oinam, and he'll be talking about contested identity along India-Myanmar border region. Before I invite him, let me tell you one thing. I was born in Myanmar, and I spent quite an amount of time in Manipur, Northeast India, of course in Delhi. Then eventually I moved to America. Then I came back to India for different reasons. One reason being my wife is Indian, and of course the second reason being I'm teaching at Gender University. And what I see is that some people do have a very little understanding about this community, specifically the Kukis, the Nagas, and the Meiteis. For example, if you go to Myanmar, in the context of Myanmar or Burma, Meitei is one of the tribes of Chin in the context of Myanmar. And similarly, Nagas are also under Chin nomenclature in Myanmar. Of course, there is a movement, or let's say there's a protest saying that we are not part of the Chin community. That's an ongoing debate going on. But officially, Nagas, Meiteis, Kukis, they all are under the Chin nomenclature in Myanmar. But if you cross the border and come to the Indian side of the border, they all claim to be different ethnicities or different ethnic groups. And of course, you might have read articles and watched some movie clips and others where there has been conflict between these communities at various points of times in the history. So having said that, I want everyone to keep that in mind, and I would like to invite the first speaker not to dwell on any specific community as such, but give us a detailed, or let's say a general understanding about identity along India-Myanmar border region. What do people see the other side of the border versus what do people say in the other side of the border, in the Indian side and the Myanmar side? And what are the implications? And how can we move forward? So on the general perception or the general understanding of this ethnicity and identity along India-Myanmar border region. And I would like to thank my colleague, Professor Samrat. He is leading a center for, I think, political border studies. And he has some students along with him. they go and visit border areas, Bhutan, Bangladesh, I think Myanmar also. And they are here with us because it relates to communities from across the border. And so now I would like to invite first speaker, Professor Oinam, to talk about contested identity along India-Myanmar border region. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kipchen. I think I'm audible to you, right? Thank you very much for inviting me. But I must also tell you that I'm not a very seasoned and grassrooted experts as these my colleagues are. You must have seen how they had been engaging with. And my discipline, you have already heard, is from philosophy. So my love for the region or my work is largely out of my, not the professional, but of emotional concern that I always had with the region. And which Kipchen has said is very contested and very dicey and problematic area. And when you said this, it was in 2002, it reminds me suddenly, I had forgotten about it. My article came up as a full-fledged link in Economic and Political Weekly, EPW, on the issues of ethnicity and identity. And there were lots of, I was happy that lots of critique, lots of comments on that article from the communities across the region. And one of the organizations, armed group, was extremely unhappy. And I did exchange few conversation, and I was in the academic mode. You know, in the academic seminars, you can speak out even sometimes very assertively. And the last letter I got was that we know where you are residing, how you move to Nehu up and down, and bullets knows no friends and foes. So that was the end of the conversation, because when violence is coming on the way, then there is no more conversation possible. Either you fight it out or you back out. So perhaps that was one of the reasons for my trying to move out, and I got into IIT Mumbai. So that's my long journey coming back to Delhi from where I started my career. I'll put it like this, that the story about this region, which you can call border or frontier of what you call at one time the British and another the Burmese, the kingdom, the empire. And when they narrate their own story about the geography, about their history, about their political domain, certainly the mapping out of the space is their own. Whether you really reside into it or not, that's a different issue altogether. But political power of control that you assert, that I have a control up to this region or that region, is one kind of a narrative from which all this crisis of the present is. I'm not going into the details, as Kipchen has said. I mean, you are going to hear from them, and in internet there are full of informations. But the perspective is what I would like to submit before you, is that 1826, that first Anglo-Burmese war, and subsequently leading to Treaty of Yandabu, was a clear-cut starting point of demarcation of the boundaries, that this is up to this region the British India was going to have, and beyond that is of what you call the Burmese. And prior to that, there had been lots of raids and infighting. British was not very keen to enter into this region. Its control was in Kolkata. So naturally, this is a remote region. They are not very keen to venture out. But slowly, because of the globalization processes at that point in time, the trade communication that was happening between Indo-China and this Indo-India, and through the Myanmar, so the trade route was an essential need for the British. And in this time, since you have also called many of us, most of us from Manipur, the kingdom of Manipur was under the control of the Burmese. So for 7 years it was devastated. The king, the princes, they reigned to what you call the Sylhet and other areas of Kasar and all this. So, and many went up to Sibsagar. So it was completely devastated under the control of the Burmese. So king of Manipur that was a Gambhir Singh, was very keen to get his kingdom back. And all his own he could not. So you needed a colonial power, the British, to recover his kingdom. And British, for its own trade interest, wanted to use this king, the prince, who has lost his kingdom. So all the way these trade routes, Gambhir Singh was instrumental in building because he wanted his kingdom back. For that he has to do. Even Tirot Singh of Meghalaya, who was captured and hanged, killed by the British, who was resisting to this trade route construction, all goes to Gambhir Singh because he was seen as a mercenary by many, but he was someone who was trying to recover his kingdom. You can see give and take that took place. And when this war took place in 1826, with British winning the war and the Treaty of Yandabu being, signed, nowhere this king of Manipur comes to the picture. It was clearly between the Burmese and the British. All said and done, that is the mightier, the umpires, they signed treaties. Rest were, negotiated. So kingdom was given back to this king of Manipur, but a large chunk of Manipur, which is called Kabo Valley, went to Myanmar, Burma, with the agreement that every year the Burmese government will pay money of compensation or what you call rent to the king of Manipur. And this continued till 1947-49. And only in the 1949, when Manipur was merged to India, then Prime Minister Nehru, without much thought, gave away the entire valley to Myanmar. So this is one narrative of the what you call colonial powers and the empires that went on. The subsequent narrative that you will find today is that those small communities, what you call Kukichin groups, staying in this what you call frontier region, were never present in the grand narrative of the British or of the Burmese. Or not that these communities did not exist, but their existence were summarily ignored. So when you draw your border of the British Empire or the Burmese Empire, the ethnic communities who were residing there for centuries, of course they were moving to and fro from here, and this colonial boundary was not in their frame of reference, because they have villages, one village with another villages, then there are village chiefs, there are contacts, communication amongst themselves, and which the colonial power also did not intervene. The war takes place in the greater framework, and the boundaries are being made, and these were what you call non-existent in their narrative. But with the nation state of India coming, British living, and the Indian state, the Burmese, the creation of the Pakistan, East and West, Pakistan, the entire whole discourse of people and the land, citizenship and the state comes into the forefront, which was not in existence. So many of these communities, because of their own education and being able to assert their point of view, which they call right to self-determination, they start saying this is what we had been living, and we were never in the picture of this narrative. You draw a boundary across our villages, our land, without our knowledge, how can you do? So this is another discourse. You will find what Kipchen was saying, that some Kuki village, their parents are in that side, the wife is in this side, and people keep moving. Still now there are free movement in many places, though there had been attempt and even talk about fencing of the border. And there are lots of issues taking place about Myanmar government infringing into the Indian territory. But this is a political issues which I do not want to enter into. But all that I'm submitting here is that the narratives come from different perspectives. One is the colonial and empire-based narratives. Another is from the, what you call, I won't call it subaltern, but ethnicity, the smaller communities who were never existent in the discourse of empire and the nation, slowly gets their own recognition, because it is no more we are subject of the British, but it is in India, and each one of us are an equal citizen of this country. And this is the strength of how, the nation state called India is recognizing to its citizens, whether you are in UP or Bihar or Manipur or anywhere, you are a part of this country and the equal rights you have as a citizen. And that is where the whole negotiation begins. So the assertion of ethnicity in the light of language that comes in, borders, settlement that comes in, and Manipur is a clear example where there are as many as 32 communities with different small languages. I don't want to break into dialects and language. That is also another colonial narrative. I don't want to. But let us say, linking languages, 32 of them. So you can imagine that each one of them are wanting to have their own autonomy. But if you start giving 32 different statehood, that also becomes a, I will fall short of saying a joke, but it is even sometimes redundant. So you have to negotiate between your rightful claim of your identity, self-governance on the one side, but also see that India has a larger picture where, you cannot keep on breaking states with smaller sizes, which is not good convenient for governance itself. So we have to negotiate on this Indian side. This is one. But contemporary issues, which I will end up with this, is you must have also noticed about National Register of Citizenship, NRC, which the present Home Minister is pushing ahead with Assam because of the foreigners coming from Bangladesh. It has been a major issue. But Mr. Kipgen may react now. The point is, many of these Kuki communities from the Myanmar side also keeps coming. And obviously this is the reason that whenever there is a greener pasture, you want to move there. Why do people come from the northeast? We want a better education. We come to Delhi, Chandigarh, nearby places. You do well, compete with other communities, citizens of this country, then you also get a set position. Each one of us are being, given a post in other parts of the country. That is also a strength of India. Nobody tells you that you come from northeast, you go back. If you are good enough, you can compete enough, you can be absorbed as a faculty or any officials in any part of the government machineries. So this is one issue on this side, that you have the recognition, all these people coming in. Now this infiltration is another. Now the argument from the community's point of view is that your boundary is construct of the colonial narrative. For us, we have been living across. We don't know about what is Myanmar or India. This is our land, this is our village. This is a narrative. Now, how do you negotiate between this? Because nation state of India and of Burma is also a reality. So one has to, I think, recognize, and there is no clear-cut answer into this. The problem is there are multiple narratives, at least two contesting narrative is coming, and identity crisis and so on and so forth are result of this, that in one side you have the Indians, the nation states coming in, citizenship, governance, facilities and so on, that resources to be shared. These are the issues on the one side. Then movement of people in their grassroots level, which knows no boundary of the nation state, is another, where you have to negotiate. I'll put a full stop here and then maybe we can discuss further on this.
Thank you, Professor Ainam. I just would like to welcome the a little bit latecomers, including Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, because he was there in Myanmar for 4 years, 3 years. And of course, his wife is from Manipur, and she was also former Indian ambassador to different countries, including Indonesia. Thank you for joining us. Now, I would like to, before I call on the second speaker, please, I would like to clarify a few things here. The speakers don't pick the topic, I assign them. So please, you have to know about that. I assign the speakers its topic. So some of them do not really appreciate the topic that I have assigned them. But I said, you can say whatever you want, but I would like to put on record this the topic, so that because this will be released in the media and people will look at it. So, but in between, you can discuss or talk about whatever you want. Again, let me just remind everyone again that this is, I would like to end up as academic conversation rather than emotional talk or speech. So having said that, now let me invite our second speaker, Professor Amarjit Singh. He will be talking about the Meitei Lebanseram and insurgency movement. And I want him to stick to 15 to 20 minutes. Yes. And definitely I will give you another chance during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. And also to the Jindal University for inviting me. So I have been assigned a topic, as Doctor has already said. And now Professor Bhagat has also already given a background of this borderland. Last week, I was at the India-Pakistan border. I went to Wagah and some other places. So now, these border areas, there is a big difference between this side of the border and then the other side of the India-Myanmar border. It's a very, very different, in terms of the topography, in terms of the various socio-economic developmental indicators. So this is something, and then now coming to the India-Myanmar border. So now, if you look at the Indian side, Indian side is relatively, in terms of various developmental indicators, the Indian side is, relatively better than the other side, means in the northern and the western part of Myanmar. So this is something that that we need to ignore. So now, as Professor Bhagat has already set the tone, so now let me just, and at the same time, in this borderland, say in the Indian side of the border, in the Myanmar side of the border, there are many similarity of problems. There are, problem of, underdevelopment. There are, various, socio-economic problems, in this side of the border and the other side of the border. And say, as for example, in India also, especially in several of the northeastern part of the country, so many of us are familiar with what is popularly called the insurgency movement. Likewise, if you cross the other side of the border, there is also, similar kind of movement. Now, even the Myanmar government is also trying to resolve this problem through negotiations. So like as India government is also negotiating with several groups in the northeast, now the Myanmar government has also initiated the process of bringing these various ethnic groups of Myanmar into the so-called the official peace process. So this is something, this is something which is very, very similar in the case of, but at the same time, this particular region, as I see, is that now things are moving. If you look at in various developmental indicators, things are moving, of course, slowly, but in a, positive directions in terms of, say, one of the main problem is the connectivity. Yes, the problem is there, but still there are, a lot of progress has been made, especially with the initiative under the Act East policy of the government of India. So, but there are challenges, the challenges are, There are numerous challenges, but at the same time, there is also a lots of hope and lots of expectations from this, the border region. But why I'm bringing is that there is always a negative perception about this particular region. But at the same time, now things are moving, especially in Myanmar also, the things are in terms of various, if you look at various government reports, you'll find that in terms of various developmental indicator or in infrastructure development, things are moving very positively. So likewise, so therefore, what is going to happen in this borderland is that along with this Act East policy, and till now, there is a very limited cross-border, very limited cross-border economic activities. So now, what is happening is that as things are, change, many positive things are taking place on the other side of the border. So we also expect a lot, in the near future. Now, I will now just try to since being led down the broader framework, now let me come to the Indian side of the border and to Manipur. So now the organizer has given me a very important, I think this is a very appropriate, because why Manipur? Manipur is a very, very important state, no doubt, but at the same time, this is also a state which has seen large number of, various, ethnic identity movement. And this is still going on. And then now even the government of India, this government has also realized that if the Manipur problem, if some of this problem can be solved, then that will have very, very big implication for the rest of the Northeast. So now this is about this identity movement, especially when we talk about the identity movement, especially in places like Manipur or in the Northeast. So now this identity movement always transforms into some kind of, some kind of movement, which is actually, if I have to say that, many of these identity movements are actually the movement for separate states. Say, for example, some of this movement, you see, especially in places like Manipur, there are movement for, they call it the independence movement. Okay, but if you look at, especially in many of the northeastern states, there are various movements. But if you actually look at many of these statehood movement, many of these movements are actually the statehood movement. So now, if you go back to the 1954 State Reorganization Report, which was produced by the State Reorganization Commission, one of their recommendations in 1954 was that there should be only one state in the Northeast. That was, what they suggested was the state of Assam. There should be only one state in the Northeast. So they said that the Assam, which is a border state, should be strong in terms of economy and in terms of militarily. So the State Reorganization Commission recommended that there should be a state of Assam and the two union territories of Manipur and Tripura. So this was the recommendation of the State Reorganization Commission in 1954, and this was accepted by the Parliament of India when the State Reorganization Act was passed. So therefore, Assam became a state, and Manipur and Tripura became union territories. But in due course of time, many new states have been, created out of Assam, says Nagaland, Mizoram, and Meghalaya, and like that. And at the same time, the union territory of Manipur and Tripura have also become separate states. So now, coming to Manipur, if I have to begin with, Manipur is a very, very, I must say that it's a very, very difficult state, in the sense that, there are several ethnic groups in the state of Manipur today. But what I see is that now many of these, the major ethnic groups, there is a sense of insecurity. Says, for example, the Manipuri, the Meitei people, they are the most dominant, politically dominant group. But there is a sense of insecurity among the Meitei people. So likewise, there is also, this sense of insecurity is there in the other, ethnic communities which are present in Manipur. So this is I think the root cause of the various problems in Manipur. Because you see when in a place like in a state, especially in India, when states were being reorganized, so many of the states were being reorganized on the basis of language or like that. So therefore, there is always a very, very dominant community in a particular state. But in a state like Manipur, it's a very, in a very different format. So as a result of that, now in Manipur, what we have been seeing is that the majority, the politically dominant group, the Manipuri or the Meitei group, so there are in favor of, if you go by the so-called the Manipuri insurgency movement, so they are, their main demand has been what is popularly called the secession of Manipur from India. So this is one of the goal of this group. But I don't know how far this movement is active. I'm not very sure. But at the same time, on the other hand, there are also other groups, say as for example, the non-Meitei, say as for example, the Nagas, or for example, the Kukis, also have their own movement. So their movement is, if I have to look at, as I have said, many of these movements in the Northeast are actually, as I have said, these are actually the movement for separate states. Say as for example, in the case of, in exactly what is happening in Manipur is also, say, the Kukis, or even the Naga. So it is more or less in line with the creation of separate state. But now there is a problem in Manipur. You see, many of this movement, either the Naga movement or the Kuki movement, in my view, these are very, very legitimate movement. Very, very legitimate movement. And many of this movement has been going on for the last many, many decades. See, as for example, the Naga movement started around the time of India's independence. In my view, the Naga insurgency is also a very, very legitimate movement. But there are many hurdles. I will always talk to my colleague that, the Naga movement is a very, very unfortunate movement also. Because you see, now everybody, now especially in the government circle, there is a realization that now time has come to resolve the Naga insurgency. So everybody appreciates this. We also appreciate this as a research scholar. But there are various challenges to achieve that, solution. So one of the biggest problems is Manipur. So when I say Manipur, the biggest problem is that I look at Manipur's geography as the problem. You see, the state reorganization in India has taken place. See, Bombay was reorganized to facilitate the creation of Gujarat and Maharashtra. Recently, Andhra Pradesh was reorganized. Assam has been, reorganized. So these reorganizations have taken place. So these are continuing process. Now, why there is a problem in Manipur is that the Manipur geography itself creates lots of hurdles. So this now you must be, some of you must be familiar with especially the Manipuri people who live in the plain areas of Manipur, why they are objecting to various statehood movement. Is that because of the geography? Now, if you look at the topography or the geography of Manipur, is that Manipur is already a small state. It's a very, very small state, right? And in this small state, the plain area is just about some 2,000 square. So the valley area is just 1/10 of the area of Manipur. So this is the problem. So therefore, on the other hand, at least about 60 to 65 people of Manipur live in the plain areas. So therefore now, if you go by the various narratives of this various movement, then if the state, if Manipur has to be reorganized, means in that sense, then at least 90% of Manipur will be, either, become a separate state or union territory or merge to the neighboring, the states of, say, Nagaland or maybe to Mizoram. So therefore, there has been lots of opposition to, especially in the plain areas of Manipur, because of this insecurity and this geography. Say for example, when Andhra Pradesh was reorganized, when Bihar was reorganized, there was no much opposition from the people. But since the situation is very, very different, especially, as I said, in the case of Manipur, as the geography doesn't allow that. So as a result of that, now the biggest hurdle, as I see, in the case of Manipur, in the solution to many of this problem is this geography. So this is the reason why especially the people who live in the plain areas have been strongly opposing. Had Manipur been the size of Arunachal Pradesh or say Arunachal Pradesh, there would not have been much opposition to the demand for the creation of new states. But that is not happening in the case of Manipur. So now, now many people are asking. So some people, even recently, some people also came to me and they asked, what is the solution? So I just want to share this also. Now, what is the solution? Because you see, now even the government of this country, the central government, have realized that if these, as for example, the Naga insurgency is considered, if the Naga insurgency can be resolved, then many of the problems in the northeast will be automatically resolved. This is true. I'm of the view that if the Naga insurgency can be resolved, then many of the problems in the northeast will be resolved forever. So this is what. So therefore, but there are various hurdles, as I have said in the beginning. So now, many people talk about, many things. Many people, either openly or, otherwise. So in my view, one of the, suggestions to this is the reorganization of the territorial constituencies of Manipur. Say Manipur has 60 territorial constituencies, means the 60 MLAs. Out of which 40 constituencies are from the valley area, which is just 10% of Manipur's land. And the rest 20 constituencies represents the hill areas. So now, therefore, what I'm thinking is that, you see, in fact, many of this movement, either, all kinds of, the so-called identity movement or the insurgency movement, not only in the Northeast, but also elsewhere in the country, many of these movements are actually also primarily the movement for political power. Because everybody wants, if you, right from India's independence, from state reorganization till today, most communities want to retain or have more political power. Means if they have more political power, means they are, so their people can be represented as ministers or MLAs or chief minister like that. So I see in that sense. So therefore, this political power, I think so therefore, in order to, there has to be realignment of this, the political, this constituency, especially in the state of Manipur. So this is something that which as I have been, as a scholar, I have written a little bit on this subject. So now, what I feel is that if I am asked what is the solution to many of these problems, as I said that there are various hurdles, but we have to have some compromise, because it's opposing or the conflicting parties have to there has to be some compromise to resolve the crisis. Otherwise, the crisis and the conflict will go on, for many, many years to go on. So therefore, there has to be some compromise. So in order to do this compromise, in my view, one thing which I really require is, which I feel is very, very necessary at this point of time, is the state, territorial constituencies. There is a need for reorganization of states' territorial constituencies, in which I say that at least both the hills and the valley should be equally represented in the state legislative assembly. This is something that which I find is more viable in the Manipur context. So I think I will stop here, and then we will. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amarjit. One thing, initially what I planned was to invite officials from the Home Ministry, especially people who are in charge of negotiation between different armed groups and the government of India. But then I got some piece of advice from some friends that once you start inviting government officers, the speakers who you invite them will not be open up. They will be hesitant to talk openly. There will not be any academic conversation. That's why I have given up my initial, thought. Then we have this kind of a better and open academic conversation. I have published several articles and books, and one of the most quoted articles that I have written is on the politics of ethnic conflict in Manipur. So, as much as there are conflicts and competing claims, there are also interests from researchers and scholars around the world. And today we are not trying to find a solution as such, but we are trying to brainstorm academically what can be the future. What future holds, and what do we have? What can we learn from these scholars from different angles and from different perspectives? So having said that, now I would like to invite our third speaker. Before I do that, I would like to make a quick announcement that we have prepared a high tea for everyone. So you will have plenty of food to eat right after the event. So please bear with us if we go a little bit over time. And now let me invite the third speaker, Dr. Thongkulul Haukip, to talk about statehood or territorial council, a boon or bane for Kuki. Kuki is one of the major groups in Manipur. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kipgen, for inviting me for this panel discussion. And I also thank Professor Bhagat and Professor Amarjit for their views. But however, I will differ a little bit from them. Of course, I thank Professor Amarjit for suggesting some certain viable solutions, such as equal representation of both the hills and the Manipur Legislative Assembly, which has been, the delimitation has been due for so many years, since the early 1970s. And India had not done any delimitation after 1973. It was in the last decade that there were attempts to delimit territorial constituencies in different states, but in Manipur there was rejected due to different reasons, competing claims and different other datas that were contested. Professor Bhagat, of course, he has given a clear, view on how this region, frontier region, the region between Burma and India, particularly the northeastern region, came into being. Of course, I endorse many of his views. It's very clear, but I would say that many of the views are, a kind of statist perception of so-called medieval kingdoms and the people who are categorized as, in the recent literature, as non-states people. For instance, there are emerging literatures from the anarchist view, like Scott and others, who are studying this upland, Southeast Asia and others, particularly the northeastern region also. And we can see this so-called people who are not counted in this frontier area. They were governed by themselves, in the sense that they were village republics. The discourse on village republics is also very much known in India also during the British rule, and they were independent in certain areas, and no external authority controls them. And if any other external, for instance, the anarchist view of non-state people, if any authority, the states, the medieval kingdoms wanted to control these people, they will escape. They are mobile people, they will escape to the hills. However, in recent decades, why do these people choose to demand state? It's particularly because we have the territorialized state systems. For instance, Manipur, Nagaland, and Assam after India became independent. And particularly in the Northeast, state has become a resource. For instance, I would give you an example that many of the northeastern states, not many, all of them are categorized as special category states. And they are given 90% of their funds from the center. And only 10% of the funds has to be raised by the respective states. So all these resources comes from the central government. And having a state or demanding a state has become a resource for them, these people. And, I would start with how Manipur came, how Manipur was categorized after independence. As soon as India became independent, the princely state of Manipur was categorized as Part C state, and along with Tripura, they were not given direct statehood. And I believe that it is because of this long delay, a delay for about 2 decades of giving statehood to Manipur, that a kind of alienation, a kind of deprivation was emerging among the Manipuris, and leading to insurgent groups like the PLA, UNLF, which we found today fighting for sovereignty in the northeastern region. And it was on 8 November 1968 that the Manipur Territorial Congress Committee submitted a memorandum to the central government, the Prime Minister of India, who was Mrs. Indira Gandhi, and also to the President of All India Congress Committee, demanding the grant of statehood to Manipur. And in that memorandum, they believe that it embodies the feelings and aspirations of the people of Manipur as a whole. And the committee, as a unit of the ruling party and running the administration of Manipur, made a comparison with a neighboring area, that is Nagaland, who was given statehood just a decade back. And then they claim that Nagaland was granted statehood. The people of Manipur, more especially those living in the contiguous area of Nagaland, are naturally tempted to go to Nagaland, where they can enjoy greater political rights and greater advantages for development. So, you can find that the Manipur Congress Committee was blaming the kind of political deprivation that was, existing in the state, in the princely state of Manipur, as statehood was not granted, and resulting in separatist and fissurous tendencies all around, which was never known before. So they also reiterated that the quotient of economic viability as a criteria to grant statehood does not hold no water after the grant of statehood to Nagaland. So there was the condition or the kind of argument or the kind of political deprivation that Manipur has before it was given statehood. So let me come to the political party or the political organization of the Cookies way back at the time of independence. The Kuki National Assembly was formed on October 24, 1946, along with the backing of the Cookies Chief Association, which is a political association of all the chiefs in the hill areas of Manipur. And they were opposing certain colonial and other kind of, system that was existing, like Pothang, beggar system, and the corrupt hill lambus who were collecting hill house taxes. But at the time of independence, there was a clear consciousness among these members that they declared that taking into consideration the various aspects of the vexing problems of the hills and valley of Manipur, it is the desire of the Kuki National Assembly to announce that the Kukis should come under the state darbar, that is the Manipur state darbar, provided the conditions are satisfactory, but failing to obtain satisfactory condition, the Kukis regretfully will have to follow the footsteps of their brothers, the Nagas, in demanding full cessation. So there was the condition that they should be granted enough kind of autonomy. And when the British paramountcy was lapsed in Manipur, and there was the president of the Manipur State Darbar who was responsible for the working of hill administration. And there was a draft constitution that divided Manipur in two parts. The Manipur State Constitution Act 1947 for the valley, and the Manipur Hill People Administration Regulation Act 1947. In this drafting, the Kuki National Assembly was not invited, and therefore the KNA began to resolve not to be bound by the decisions of the committee unless certain conditions are met. For instance, the problem of solving land alienation of the Kukis, abolition of forced labor, granting of equal rights with the plainsmen. So, until the 1980s, the KNA, which was also a political party in Manipur and a part of the, sometimes a part of the ruling government, had certain demands which continue till the late 1980s. By the late 1980s, there were formation of, insurgent groups like the KNF and KNA. Take, for instance, I have been, instrumental in retrieving the article published in Shillong Times in 1993 by this president of this armed group. And in that, I could find some of the reasons why the KNF was formed. Take, for instance, there is a narrative that among the Kukis that if you want to drive a bike, you should start a rebellion, right? And that sentence clearly indicates that there is a kind of, in 3 decades of state of Manipur, there is a kind of developmental disparity between the hills and the valley. So we can find that in that particular article in the Shillong Times, I find that, the president of the KNF was stating that the contributions of the Kukis to freedom struggle is not adequately recognized. He states that the Kukis participated in the Indian National Army led by Subhash Chandra Bose. They have fought an imperial struggle against the British for 3 years. And all these struggles, subaltern struggles, are not recognized adequately. So we have a kind of a political deprivation, economic as well as cultural and educational neglect in that piece. So the KNF was formed on May 18, 1988 in the Indo-Myanmar border called Mulnoi. Likewise, the Kuki National Army was also formed in that same year in that Myanmar side of the border, but very close to Manipur. So, for instance, the Kuki National Organization or the Kuki National Army, they claims to strive for self-determination of Kuki people both in India and Myanmar, which signifies the right of the Kukis to govern their own affairs. So, my question, another question today is that it is about the right to govern themselves. And in India, we have the 6th schedule of the Constitution, which gives the power to the tribal people to govern themselves under, these provisions. We have the district councils under the 6 schedules. But however, these provisions were not extended to the princely state of Manipur and Tripura. However, there were two acts that were passed. For instance, the Manipur Hill Areas District Council Act 1971, and an election was held to these councils in 1973, and which became functional in the year itself. But however, in the first year of its functioning itself, it was found that these councils have no legislative power. They were financially constrained, and if you ask any member of these district councils, they would claim that they are just toothless tigers. Starting in 1978, there is a constitution provisional for Manipur, for the tribals in these areas, that under Article 371C, there is a provision that Manipur should have a hill area committee. And this hill area committee should be looking after the affairs of the hill people. The member of the Legislative Assembly in Manipur would be chosen as the chairman and member of this committee, and any amendments, any legislative and other policies taken by the government would be approved only after the consultation of this committee. But take for instance, in a few years back, there was a very big agitation in the hill areas of Manipur called the 3 bills movement. Manipur passed 3 bills simultaneously without consulting the Hill Area Committee. And that act or that bills affect the hill areas of Manipur. So because of that anger or deprivation in terms of political and other platforms, the people agitated. So in 1991, the Manipur Assembly agreed for certain local adjustment to introduce the 6th schedule of the constitution. For instance, from 1978, there has been a demand in the hill areas of Manipur that 6th schedule should be introduced for these autonomous district councils. But however, it was only in 1991 that it can be introduced with certain local amendments and adjustment. However, the 6th Schedule Demand Committee of Manipur, they rejected, and then they demanded that it should be implemented in a total. Take for instance, for a comparison, the Tripura Tribal Areas Autonomous District Council Act was passed in 1979, about 8 years after the Manipur ADC Act was passed. And it was in 1983 that the first ADC elections were held, and the tribal people in Tripura felt that they have no adequate power under this act, and they demanded to be provided under the 6th schedule of the constitution. And it was granted by the Tripura Legislative Assembly within 2 years of the demand. So take a comparison between Tripura and Manipur, who have different political status before becoming a full-fledged statehood or after becoming. So compare between the tribals in the Manipur and Tripura, then there is, of course, a kind of political deprivation in Manipur that was gaining momentum and alienation thereof. So after the insurgent movement started in Manipur from the late 1980s, particularly in 1987, the KNF and KNA headed the movement both in the Indian side and Myanmar side of the border. And on 22nd August 2018, these two conglomerate of insurgent groups signed a tripartite agreement with the government of India and government of Manipur under the suspension of operations for 1 year to create a positive environment for political dialogue. And since then, for the last 1 decade, there is a continuous dialogue. And then simultaneously in 2010, there was a very political committee called Cookie State Demand Committee was formed to push up the demand for statehood of the Cookies. So today, if we talk about the viability of the statehood or viability of the territorial council, I think as an academician, I'm not here to discuss the viability. It is with the people. The people have to decide and negotiate with the other competing claims. And as I've stated, Northeast India is under the special category states. If you talk about financial and other viability, then it comes from the center. It mainly comes from the center, and it is managed with these financial grants to these states. It's only about 10%, even less than that, that has to be generated within. So today there is a negotiation going on between the Kuki armed groups and the Manipur government on the other hand, and central government for a territorial council. I hope the base kind of outcome would come, and I really wish that peaceful agreement would be arrived soon. We need more peace, development, and education rather than bloodsheds and any kind of polarization that is existing in the Northeast. Thank you.